Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Doris Polo in Quito, and this is from the South. Dominica has received 3,000 rapid testing kits and 50 reagents from Venezuela as the Bolivarian Republic continues to assist its neighbors in the fight against COVID-19. At the handover ceremony, Dominica took the opportunity to echo calls for an end to the unilateral coercive measures against the Latin American country.
I would like to call on the international community. Let us seek and find a peaceful resolution to the problems now being faced in Venezuela. We do not believe that civil war will solve the problem. In fact, that has proven to create more problems in other parts of the world. And so I would like to join our other CARICOM brothers and sisters in calling for a peaceful solution, a peaceful resolution to the problems now being undergone in Venezuela.
This situation, as you know, has inevitably caused a decrease in the level of cooperation and solidarity that our beloved Republic of Venezuela was used to sharing. But have no doubt, it is our goal to free ourselves from these sanctions and blockades, to redeploy our resources for the benefit of our Latin American and Caribbean region.
Continuing in the region, general elections in the Dominican Republic that was scheduled for May 17th have been postponed until July 5th. Electoral authorities made the announcement on Monday, citing the novel coronavirus pandemic as the reason for the postponement. The announcement also pointed out that a possible runoff vote would be scheduled for July 26th. The Dominican Republic has confirmed over 3,000 cases of COVID-19, with close to 200 deaths. The Prime Minister of the Bahamas, Hubert Minnis, provided the latest figures regarding the COVID-19 pandemic in that country.
Earlier today, the Ministry of Health reported 2 additional confirmed cases of COVID-19, bringing the total number of confirmed cases in the Bahamas to 49 as of Monday, the 13th of April, 2020. 8 of the COVID-19 positive patients have died. The patients who have succumbed to COVID-19 were older in age and had significant comorbidities or conditions that are known to cause a poor outcome in COVID-19.
Now, in a radio interview on Saturday, Antigua and Barbuda's Prime Minister Gaston Brown raised doubt that the international community would assist the Caribbean region amid the COVID-19 pandemic.
So now that the entire world is in crisis and that they have their own problems, that they're thinking inwardly. In fact, they're so domesticated in their thinking that even a few ventilators, to allow a few ventilators to come to the Caribbean, they're seizing them. To allow a few masks to come to the Caribbean, they're seizing them. What does that tell you? There will not be any significant response to help us. And you know what they'll say to us? You're relatively wealthy countries. You have very large GDP, so fix your own problems. And if you can't fix it, we'll go into a formal IMF program. And that is where we will have some level of concern, in the sense that we do not believe that IMF programs in which they're going to tell us to send home 50% of the people, that is the solution. We had this challenge about 6 years ago. As soon as we came in, within a matter of weeks, we had this situation with the IMF in which they requested that we go back into another IMF program. We said to them, no.
In Cuba, working from home has been one of the measures promoted by the government in response to the global pandemic. Let's take a look at how this is being implemented across the island. From her home in a locked-down Havana, Lisette Vila is changing her creation methods. She is the head of Palomas, a project that promotes gender equality and social inclusion through audiovisual media. She says that during this time, she cannot go out to record her creations.
Pueden haber personas There may be people who think that the quarantine is too harsh or unjust. The same with social distancing. But this is a matter of discipline to protect our health, which is a human right. Education is also a human right, as is life, so they all come together.
COVID-19 has forced billions across the world to self-isolate at home, but most people did not have the time to psychologically prepare for this.
During this time of isolation in our private homes, inequalities can come about and violence can take place. While at home, duties must be equally distributed. This is time for rest. There needs to be respect for others' privacy, and also it's a time to spend time together.
Her home is now the headquarters of Palomas. Her team is here as well. They are all investigating behaviors caused by the pandemic.
We live in a patriarchal society where men have often been taught that they need to be the providers, that we must be the economic support of our families. But we need to rethink those roles, especially during this quarantine, so that we can have more fluid roles with our families at home.
For Lisette and her team, the responsibility of these days gives meaning to their work, which exists within a political landscape as well.
We need to take care of ourselves every day beyond the current social distancing. The future will come, and we hope to see people using this time in order to prepare for a better future.
Palomas has a new headquarters for the time being. From here, they continue to promote ideas, feelings, and emotions for human development. We'll take a short break now. When we return, is Chile underreporting its COVID-19 figures? Stay with us for details. Welcome back. Social organizations are rejecting the way the Chilean government is continuing or counting the deaths due to coronavirus. The government of Sebastián Piñera announced it considers people that have died due to COVID-19 as recovered patients. The Minister of Health said that those who died have stopped being a source of contamination and have now been added to the list of recovered. He said 898 patients who have either entered a quarantine or died will be declared recovered. This comes after scientists in Thailand said over the weekend they identified the first instance of somebody dying from COVID-19 after catching it from a dead body. Research on how long the coronavirus survives in the body after death is very limited, but various governments recommend extra caution when handling the body of COVID-19 victims. Meanwhile, the referendum to change the constitution, which has created a dictatorship, has been postponed to October due to COVID-19. And a law that would have allowed prisoners to leave in case of risk of contracting COVID-19 has not been approved. The most conservative wing of Piñera's party in Congress added a pardon for those guilty of crimes against humanity during the dictatorship, which did not pass. Almost 800 Bolivians will undergo a quarantine in the Chilean city of Iquique after Bolivia's de facto government has finally agreed to allow its own citizens to return to the country amid the COVID-19 pandemic. The group was stranded along the border for over a week while Chilean authorities pleaded with Bolivia's de facto president to let them cross the border.
The president does not give a reason, nor an answer so far or anything. We don't know why she doesn't want to let us through, because the truth is that she's afraid that we are infected.
Now, during the COVID-19 pandemic, Ecuadorian authorities have received more than 6,800 complaints of gender violence within the last month. According to the Human Rights Protection Council, there are 235 alerts every day of women who suffer some kind of violence. During the health emergency, there have been attempts of femicides, and 3 of them were killed in Ecuador. 65 out of 100 women have been victims of gender violence in the country. Meanwhile, task forces have announced that only 600 bodies were so far buried out of the 1,400 that had been retrieved from homes and hospitals due to the pandemic. Authorities admitted there are families that waited up to 5 days for health officials to pick up the bodies of their loved ones. A social research organization in Peru has announced that more than a third of the nation's citizens stopped receiving any kind of income after the start of the pandemic. The crisis is leading many to ask for government assistance, as community kitchens have also closed down. A large part of Peru's workforce relies on irregular work, and since the president declared a state of emergency, their sources of income have vanished. And workers' unions in Peru have rejected an announcement by President Martin Vizcarra stating that companies can stop paying workers and even lay them off during the pandemic. Union leaders said this measure was not only not consulted with workers, but also contradicts an earlier promise of the government in which it had agreed to protect jobs and salaries. Unions said they will take to the streets to protest despite quarantine measures. Turning our attention to El Salvador, response to a widespread work stoppage due to COVID-19, social organizations and government officials have delivered essential products to the most vulnerable. Let's hear from our correspondent in San Salvador, Ernesto Avalos.
I am in the community of Las Palmas, where Major Ernesto Miochat helped distribute solidarity baskets, which will reportedly reach to 300,000 in all the department. There has been made a significant supply of these baskets that contain basic food and other essential products. This is a response of the need for the people to be in quarantine, which may be ended on April 28. Some Salvadorans have also received $300, which the government destined to help around 1.5 million who are not able to go out for their daily activities. Thus, the municipalities and social organizations are trying to cooperate with the population who need access to food. In the latest report, the number of COVID-19 cases reached 137, 6 of which have died. On the other hand, confinement centers, which have surpassed 100 at national level, are being reduced to 87 since the majority of the population who had been in quarantine from the beginning was allowed to leave these facilities.
Ernesto Avalos with that report. The Brazilian government is building a new field hospital in the state of Goiás near the capital Brasilia. With capacity for 200 beds, the hospital is set to treat COVID-19 patients, but some citizens of the region denounced the hospital as being built in a populated area, raising concerns about their safety. The death toll in Brazil rose over 1,200 on Monday, as there have been over 22,000 confirmed cases of the novel coronavirus across the country.
Here live the people who are more humble. Then it will help the population. It will serve everyone more here. It is easier with more access than the area there in Brasilia.
I think it is important to fight the coronavirus, but in the right place, not where they are building. If you have a hospital almost ready, why didn't you spend the rest of the money there?
In the midst of the pandemic, the Uruguayan government has refused to provide a basic income for the most vulnerable sectors of the population or raise taxes on big business to tackle the health crisis. We have more details in this report.
Uruguayan President Luis Lacalle Pou ruled out the possibility that society's wealthiest sector make a greater contribution to the state in order to combat the COVID-19 pandemic. Questions as to whether the economic crisis merited higher income tax for the richest, Lacalle answered as follows.
Today, taxing the capital, from my point of view, is to ampute the possibility of those who are going to make force at the exit of the crisis. That's why we won't do it.
This decision reveals the lack of coherence with which the government is facing the situation. Days ago, the president himself announced a transitional tax on public sector salaries over $2,700 in order to combat the crisis. But he said nothing about taxes on the private sector or big businesses. It must also be added that he refused to guarantee a basic income as proposed by several social organizations.
It is not the universal basic income. It is a transitional income in the emergency that allows to solve staying at home, because the work became small, because there are less people on the street, because there is less money circulating, and there are sectors of private activity with important incomes. And it could be a good thing to study about what way they could contribute so that we could arrive to a financing that reaches out a helping hand for these people.
With no possibility of the private sector or big business contributing more to state revenue, it is clear that the crisis will be paid for by workers. According to Doctor in Political Sciences Constanza Moreira, the government has already decided that solidarity should only come from the state, while the private sector will not have to contribute a single cent.
In reality, we are working our way out of the crisis using state resources because the debt is paid by everybody, because pensions, because the salaries that are taxed are those of public officials, because pensions are paid for by society as a whole. Evidently, the part of the society that is called on to be solidary is the state. It is basically the state, because the private sector remains untouched, as does big business.
The COVID-19 pandemic has already caused multiple economic impacts in Uruguay. Since the health emergency was decreed, as well as the voluntary isolation of citizens, the labor market has contracted and more than 120,000 people have requested unemployment insurance. More than 300,000 informal workers have been left without an income, and the future points towards an economic recession. Faced with the dramatic situation, there are some who bear the brunt of the crisis while others only seek to protect their profit. Mateo Grillet, Telesur, Montevideo, Uruguay.
We have more stories coming up, including reports that China is moving ahead with the next phase of 2 COVID-19 vaccines. Details in just a moment. Welcome back. China has approved another 2 COVID-19 vaccine candidates for clinical trials. The 2 vaccines are being developed by laboratories in the city of Wuhan and Beijing. One of the vaccines, developed under the guidance of the Academy of Military Sciences, has already entered the second phase of clinical trial, meaning that now researchers are testing the efficacy and safety of the vaccine on a group made up of between 100 and 300 people. According to the Chinese Ministry of Science and Technology, the government is pushing forward research and experiments on 5 kinds of vaccines, though no date has been given on when any of them will be available.
The 2 inactivated vaccines that were approved for clinical trials in the past 2 days are based on conventional techniques. The production of such vaccines is maturing techniques and the standards are more controllable. It also has a wider scope of application, and there are internationally conventional standards on safety and effectiveness. The work in this regard will provide more alternatives in vaccines.
Leaders of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations held an online summit on Tuesday to address the challenges of the global pandemic. The chairman of the bloc, Vietnamese Prime Minister Nguyen Xuan Phuc, highlighted that efforts to contain the disease have proven to be successful across the member nations.
Cooperation in healthcare, defense, economic affairs and tourism has grown. Assistance in the provision of essential commodities and medical supplies have been given in aid, has been provided to fellow Asian citizens in need. Our efforts to contain the pandemic have produced encouraging results, and the pandemic is actually under control. It shows that out of a population of 650 million, there have been just over 15,000 confirmed cases, which is lower than the global average.
Continuing with that positive news, the rate of new coronavirus infections has slowed in several European countries, leading some to loosen restrictions, but still fearing a second wave of infections. Ira Spitzer, journalist from CGTN in Berlin, reports for Telesur.
Countries face difficult decisions in the coming days and weeks as they consider whether and how to loosen the restrictions on public life, which have been in place because of the coronavirus outbreak. Europe has been hit extremely hard by the global pandemic, but what we've seen in certain countries over the past few days has been a flattening of the infection curve, and that has led politicians and others to start trying to decide how to go forward with restarting the economies and getting people out of their houses and back to something resembling a normal life here in the two hardest hit countries, Spain and Italy. We are seeing some changes. Spain will allow non-essential workers, certain non-essential workers such as construction workers who are unable to work from home to, in some cases, return to the job. In Italy, some shops are now opening. We've also seen loosening of restrictions in Austria, the Czech Republic, and Denmark. Here in Germany, leaders will discuss that possibility on Wednesday. So it really is something that the continent is grappling with, but the tremendous risk here and the worry for people as well as politicians is a possible second wave of infections. So that really is the question as the countries consider their options here. Ira Spitzer, CGTN for Telesur in Berlin.
Now, in Russia, President Vladimir Putin has expressed concern that the nation is facing a surge in the number of patients seriously ill from COVID-19. The number of cases is reported to be growing steadily by 16 to 18% a day.
We see that the situation is changing daily, and unfortunately, it's changing for the worse. The number of infected people has increased. Moreover, there are more and more severe cases of the disease. I have already said it, that the upcoming weeks will be determining.
Pakistani authorities are raising concerns over the rise in reports of sexual abuse against school children by religious leaders. Police confirm they have received dozens of reports of alleged sexual harassment by religious leaders who run illegal community schools. Several of the institutions are not registered and there is no clear law to regulate their conduct.
Being a doctor, I suspected something, and I shifted that baby to the isolation room for further examination. And when I examined the baby, he was also having some other issues relating the sexual assault.
When that victim will be grown up and he will come into the society as a professional or something else, then people will start tagging him that this is the person who was physically or sexually abused. So there are some shame elements which compel the parents that they should hide the crime.
And we end in Egypt, where the official opening of the Grand Egyptian Museum has been postponed to the year 2021 due to the COVID-19. Egypt's Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities said for now restoration work inside the venue will continue. The museum has been under construction for over a decade and is intended to showcase Egypt's ancient treasures. When completed, it will house 50,000 artifacts, including the famed mask of Pharaoh Tutankhamun.
The grand opening of the gem will be postponed till 2021. And we understand, of course, this decision, like all the Olympic Games everywhere in the world, all the big events were postponed to the next year. But we are continuing our work. We're working with more than 5,000 persons per day. And we're not very keen to have all this gathering in closed galleries, and so to save their health, we decided to slow down the work inside the museum. But the restoration work is progressing quite well. We moved more than 5,000 objects from the collection of Tutankhamun. The work progress now is more than 90%. We are aiming to end the project by early 2021. As the opening, it's another issue.
With that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. For our viewers in Africa, remember you can find us on Starsat Channel 461 in South Africa and Channel 539 in Nigeria. And join us on social media for Telesur English. I'm Doris Polo. Thanks for watching.